Hey everyone, lately I've been recording guitar loops and similar things into my XY because I've been working on some newer and older songs that have more singing and maybe a bit more of like an indie rock slash pop vibe to them. So I've been using a bit more guitar and I have learned a lot in the process of trying to record loops onto the XY, and I wanted to share what I've learned. First of all, this is pretty limited. 20 seconds is the maximum loop you can record, but since I mostly work with 8-bar loops, that means I can record an 8-bar loop at any tempo above 96 BPM, or a 4-bar loop at any tempo above 48 BPM. So for me, that 20-second limit is more than enough most of the time. What I'm going to talk about this time is adding a count-in, multi-tracking, using the drum versus the multisampler engine, and then a few different kind of editing things that I've learned along the way. I just want to show you my process, which has a lot of room for improvement, but I'm hoping that it might help save you some of the frustrations I went through initially when I started recording guitar onto my XY. Right now, all I have is this drum loop. And I'm going to be recording an 8-bar guitar loop, so I'm going to use track 4 for that. And I'm going to hold bar, and I'm going to hit 8. Now, I could pull up the drum sampler engine and use that for track 4 if I really wanted to, and I could record my loops onto the drum sample engine. The only downside of that is that it's going to make it so that my guitar is part of the percussion gain group and not the melodic gain group, which I find kind of annoying. So this has led to me using the multisampler engine more than the drum engine, but on the multisampler engine, you can't edit the panning of individual samples the way that you can on a drum engine. So each has its pros and cons, but I'm going to record the verse onto the multisampler track, then I'm going to load it into the drum engine to show you how you would deal with it there and a couple of like caveats that you might not think of ahead of time. But I'm not going to be able to just immediately start playing guitar when I hit play. I'm going to want a count in, so I'm going to make one for me, and here's my general process. I will go to song mode by holding shift and hitting arranger, hit M2 to go before whatever scene you're on, and I'm going to add whatever is currently a blank scene. So right now I'm going to add scene 99. I'm going to go back to arranger mode, and let's change what 99 is. So for 99, I don't want any of these instrument tracks. And in fact, for the aux tracks, I also don't really want any of the aux tracks. I'm just going to leave the punch-in track. And I'm going to set that, well, this was already set this from a previous take, but I'm going to set that to 2 because I want to count in for 2 measures. And so since this is the only track playing, we have the metronome enabled. If we go to song mode, we'll see a 2-bar count in followed by starting our beat. So that's exactly what we want. We've basically added a count in, and when we're done with it, we can just hit M2 and hit M4 to delete it. Let me add that back in. Oops. Oh, yeah. There we go. So the next step is going to be attaching my guitar, and I'm just going to take a mono cable straight from my acoustic guitar into the XY, and then we're just going to adjust it a little bit and record this intro. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to go back to the instrument tracks. I have track 4 opened up, and I'm going to hit the sampler button. And this one's just going to go under, let's go under G, because I was using F in the last take, and that's going to make it a little easier for us, long story short. So what I'll do is I'm going to play the guitar a bit and make sure that my levels are okay. It's worth noting that this this caps out like 2/3 of the way to the top. That's as high as this goes. So if you're adjusting the levels and you're looking at this image, don't expect it to go all the way to the top. That's thrown me off a few times before. I'm going to set the threshold a bit lower. And let's just see what it's like to play a bit of guitar. In this case, I might just go ahead and increase that volume at least a little bit. There, that sounds a little bit better to me. I'm going to increase the threshold too. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold shift and hit M1, which is going to arm it for recording at that threshold. And when I hit play, we're going to do the count in, followed by this scene with the drums. And I'm going to record my 8-bar loop there. So shift and M1, we've got threshold armed, and let's hit play. Okay, so that's one of the takes. And before we even edit it or anything, I'm just going to do a second take over here on this G. And I'll just have the same exact settings, same exact process, and we will mix these and figure that all out later. So I'm going to hold Shift and enable our threshold. Then I'm going to hit play. Okay, so that was close enough. I'm going to unplug my guitar and set it down, and then we're going to do the rest of this. Okay, so I'm going to return and hit the instrument button, and here's where we're going to edit both of our loops, which are starting on G for each of them. I'm going to have to edit the endpoint by zooming in on this first knob, hitting that first encoder down. Cool. Then I'm going to do the same with this other G. Now let's hear how they sound together. Well, first of all, actually, an important step here. Let's just level them a bit. Oops. And let's make this one about a little louder too. So they're about the same. Now, one thing I want to make sure doesn't happen is I don't want them to repeat that middle part. So I'm going to hit this first G, hold Shift, tap the third encoder. Now I've turned off loop mode. Same with the second encoder. Loop mode is off. Let's go ahead and add our loop. Turn off the metronome. And that sounds fine. And right now this is sending to the melodic group, which is great. But the problem is that without those two guitar parts being panned, it really doesn't sound that multi-tracked. It just kind of sounds like, almost kind of like crappy guitar playing, which I'm not denying. But I want to let you know that that's not how it should always sound. So I'm going to go ahead and load these up into a drum engine instead and show you some of the pros and cons of that. But first, let's just edit this a little bit. So I'm going to keep this playing, and I'm going to edit at least the filter and a couple other things. So let's hit play, Shift, and Instrument. This is the preset menu. Let's adjust that high-pass filter. There we go. Now there's lots of room for a bass. Let's check what's being modulated. We're all good. If you want to have a filter, you could do that. If you wanted to make it sound like wobbly, you could like put a tremolo on it or something. And we could make it, I guess, get wobblier as it goes. Maybe that's not how it works. I don't know. Oh, that sounds horrible. So I'm turning off the LFO. But I was just trying to make the point that you could play with this and do a few more things with them. You could also send them to the effects tracks. Let's move on and make track 3 is going to be an empty drum track. And we'll make this our next spot that we're going to play these samples from. So I'm going to load these up to F and F. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm only going to have a few guitar loops per song. I'm not going to have more than 12. And for me, it's much easier to remember whatever sample's on this F sharp or whatever loop is on this F sharp is the same thing an octave above. That's just much easier for me than remembering, okay, these two are paired, these two are paired, these two are paired, this one isn't paired. I like to keep it in a way that I think I'll be able to remember and be consistent with. I'm going to open up our sample library for this, hold Shift and hit the sampler button. I'm going to go to F. I'm going to scroll down to user songs. And then I'm going to look for fine print. And I did these under G. So let's do G2 for that one. And then let's do fine print G3, for this one. Unfortunately, well, we got to increase the octave, and we're going to have to do all the same trimming and stuff again. Not the end of the world, but just kind of mildly annoying, especially because they work a little differently with how you trim them. So let's get this right to the beginning there. Same with this. So that's got a bit to go. Don't do that. We're also going to have to adjust some of the playback settings like I just accidentally alluded to. Okay, so I'm going to zoom back out. Going to adjust this fourth encoder so it's gated. And I want it to be that way for both samples. Gate, gate. And the reason for that is if I'm going to be playing this, I don't want the guitar loop to just always keep playing every time I stop the song. So I find this to make it just a little easier. Let's make it so that this is 8 bars long by holding bar and hitting the value key 8. And then from here, let's just try to play these and see if we need to make adjustments first. That sounds much closer than I was expecting. I really was not expecting that at all. Okay, so let's go ahead and put them both right here and make sure that they last the whole length. And now let's just listen to it right here. This should sound almost identical to what we had on the multisampler engine. But like I said, the panning is the advantage of the drum track, right? So let's go ahead and let's go back to this first sample, hold shift, let's pan it to the left by holding shift and adjusting the second encoder. Now let's pull up this sample and pan it to the right by doing the same thing but in the opposite direction. So now we're going to hear the first take mostly through the left speaker and the second take mostly through the right speaker, and it'll give it kind of a more legitimate multi-tracked feeling, at least in my view. Especially let's add in some of that high pass filter. Let's add in an effect send. And let's make it so that the tone is a bit higher. And actually, let's just make it so that only the guitar is loud there. Actually, just for fun, I'm also going to record in the chorus. Let's just record only this part right now. So the way I'll do that is I will go to song 2 by hitting G. I'm going to delete that very first one. Let's add in a count in 99. And then I will add in my verse 2, or my scene 2. So I'm going to turn the metronome back on. I'm going to go to track 3. And let's pull up the sampler. Oh yeah, it's on the same one. So let's just make this one go under A. Plug in my guitar again. And I actually strum the chorus pretty loudly, so I'm going to have to check my levels on this and remember that I don't want it to actually go above or go all the way up to that spot. So not the top, but that spot. And let me just play a little bit to see if we have to adjust it. Seems like we're fine, so I'm going to go ahead and arm this for recording, and then I'm going to just do 2 loops of this. But first, I need to set my threshold appropriately, right? So here we go, 2 loops of this. And let me just do a second take of that same thing. Again, 1 octave up, and the purpose of this is just to be able to double track it. So I made a mistake there, and actually I ended up recording that to this first scene's drum kit. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and copy and paste this, and then I'll just add those A's instead of the F's that we had before. One thing you might notice that we don't actually have to trim as much when we start on the drum engine. For whatever reason, the drum engine is pretty good at trimming off silence, and the multisampler engine, which works pretty similarly, isn't. I have no insight into that. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing where we're going to make it so that these are gated. Then we're going to change the ways that they are panned. Shift and second encoder. Then we got the high pass, and let's just hear what this sounds like now. Let's make sure that they're both kind of in time with each other. Oops. They definitely leave something to be desired, and we can really hear that they're definitely being loud in the drum track specifically, or in the drum group specifically, right? It doesn't sound like it's set apart at all. One thing we could do is we could send this to a different effects or something, and make sure that the drums aren't sent to that effect, and that could make it stand out, but then you're going to limit what else you can do. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and turn down that first track just because it's so loud. Okay. I accidentally deleted the drums that I had before, which is, kind of a classic mistake in a lot of ways. And I'm going to go ahead and just program in something similar. And this should be good. So at this point, we should just be able to hear that first guitar loop, which is going to be the verses, and then we'll go right into the chorus, and we'll just see how it sounds. If you really wanted this to sound awesome, you'd probably want to use 2 multi-sample tracks and pan those separately, just to give you a little bit more control. But I think this will probably sound okay for my purposes. It's pretty muddy, but just for a tutorial, I'll call it good enough. So let's listen to this. So they go a bit out of sync near the end there, but not the end of the world, and I just wanted to show what I've been learning so far with recording guitar. I hope that this helps you, and please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.